Hi, you're watching Module 4, Prepare to Tell Your Story. This is one of 5 lessons of the Transitioning Land to New Generation Land Transfer Training. I'm Megan Fowler with American Farmland Trust, and I will be walking you through this lesson today. First, I'd like to give my warmest gratitude to Dr. Melissa Bird, who lovingly helped craft the information in this lesson. In addition to these online resources, we also have trained staff who would be happy to help you walk through the process of accessing or transferring a farm or ranch. Check out the description below with links to worksheets and information and find out how to connect with us. I hope you enjoy. Hi, and welcome to Transitioning Land to a New Generation, Preparing to Tell Your Story. This module is the 4th of 5 consecutive modules or workshops in the Transitioning Land to New Generation Land Transfer Training curriculum. This is designed to help participants gain the basic skills needed to participate in a farm, ranch, or land transfer process. This module prepares participants to communicate your values, visions, and goals for your farm transfer situation to a specific audience. Participants will use effective verbal and nonverbal communication to tell their story. Please note that land transfer training materials will be adapted and updated as time goes on. This recording is being made on June 27th, 2024. So depending on when you access the resources, some of this material may have changed or been updated. This curriculum was created by American Farmland Trust with a lot of help from a national educational team of advisors and a group of subject matter experts. It was made possible by a grant from the USDA Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, with additional support from Farm Credit and members of AFT. So let's get started. There are a series of steps in a farmer or ranch transfer process. And if you've looked at the other modules in this, you've likely seen this same slide with different circles. Right now we're in telling your story. We've broken the steps down into 10 steps. You'll likely take most of them, if not all of them, but it is not a linear process. So while a certain amount of order makes sense, you'll likely find that you move forward and back several times before you are done with the transfer process. Today, we're going to talk about strategies that support effective communication skills to prepare you to present your vision, values, and goals to different audiences. We'll focus on some key communication skills that are specifically important for farm and ranch transfers. One of those is listening. Ideally, you can find a partner to practice this with you, but you can also work through this on your own and take your listening skills out into your day-to-day world. So today we will explore ways to use your values, vision, and goals to tell a story. We want to support your goals and help create constructive conversations and relationships to keep your farm or ranch transfer moving. We'll work to identify who you are speaking with and why, what relationships you are sharing your story with, and why you are having this conversation. We'll work to outline how and where you will share your story. How and where you are having conversations may help inform how you will tell your story. We'll think through scenarios to help you plan. We'll also practice effective communication skills based on who you are talking to, how you will communicate your values, visions, and goals in a way that is compelling to the specific person or people you are meeting with. And we'll also discuss effective communication for different audiences. So before you start, there are a few things you might want to collect, work on, or pull together. For Module 1, which is getting started with farm and ranch transfer, we will be referring to some worksheets there, especially the Vision, Values, and Goals worksheet, the Needs Assessment worksheet, and the SMART Goals worksheets. We'll add links to resources below in the video description. I'll also ask you to find an image that you will use to help facilitate your story. So look for an image that shows why you want to farm a ranch if you're seeking land, or why you want to pass your land on if you're transitioning out. You may want to pause the video here while you collect some of these items. So once you have some of those items together, we'll do a quick practice just to get your brain working. So starting with using your image and your values statement that you hopefully have created with the vision, values, and goals worksheet. You can do this alone or with a partner, and you can always come back to this with a partner at a later time if you don't have one now. The goal of this activity is for you to express your vision statement of your farm or ranch and why it's important to you. If you haven't already, complete the Vision, Values, and Goals worksheet from Module 1 and use your image to practice saying your vision out loud. Use the image to help you get more creative, more personal, or expand on your vision statement. You may want to pause the video here again and take your time to collect or create your vision statement, and then practice saying it out loud, even if it's just to yourself. So, why are we talking about storytelling in farm and ranch transfers? Because your story is important. And to reach your goals, you'll have to share who you are, what you want, what you need with others in a compelling way, in a way that is compelling to them. For some, sharing your story can be energizing and exciting, and for others, it can be daunting and nerve-wracking. In either case, it takes time, careful preparation, and practice to present your vision, values, and goals to help achieve your farm and ranch transfer goals. So today we'll talk through creating a story from your values, and we'll prepare to adapt your story based on who you're talking to. We'll also practice writing and saying your story out loud again. Here's an example of a nice quote around storytelling from Robin Wall Kimmerer. I dream of a world guided by a lens of stories rooted in revelations of science and framed with an indigenous worldview. Stories in which matter and spirit are both given voice. So, what are the key elements to creating your story? Who you are, what you bring, what you want, your ideal outcome, and what you need. The storytelling process is one that can lead to remarkable clarity and synchronicity with each other. When you have two or more parties coming together to work toward a farm or ranch transfer, it's important that they can find commonalities, build empathy, and develop understanding of each other's visions, values, goals, wants, and needs. If you're not used to promoting yourself, this will take some practice. The first step is to pull together the core elements of your story. So, who you are, not just your name and what you do, but what are your values? Where do you come from? Again, you'll refer to the values information sheet and the vision, values, goals worksheet. But think on this. Who are you authentically? What do you bring? What are you bringing to this story? What are your assets? And remember, assets are not totally necessarily financial. Consider your skills and connections and your history as an asset to what you bring. In Module 1, you'll also find an assets inventory worksheet that might be useful here. What do you want? What are your goals? And this, if you've worked through Module 1, you can refer to the SMART Goals worksheet, or you can work through that and come back at a later time. But you'll want to clarify, what are your goals? What are your non-negotiable goals? And what are goals that are a little bit more negotiable? Those are all important to start pulling apart here. And what's your ideal outcome? What is your vision? What is the best situation you can imagine? This is a time to daydream and to vision. And what do you need? So need may depend on who you're presenting to. You'll eventually want to think about what you need from someone you are speaking to directly. Again, we'll refer to the needs assessment worksheet, and you may also want to express some of the challenges you are facing in getting what you want, depending on the audience. And remember, authenticity is important. You have these tools to orient you. So be yourself and own your story. Okay, we'll take a time for another practice activity. This time we'll be writing a letter to start sharing our stories. So using the worksheet called Letters to Supporters, there are two versions, one for land seekers and one for landholders. So the goal of this activity is to start creating and expressing your story by writing a letter. In this activity, you can express anything you want about your story. Think of this more as brainstorming. You can adapt and refine later, and later we'll work on adapting this story to a more specific audience. After you've had a chance to write your letter, you can practice reading it out loud to a partner or out loud to yourself, and maybe consider recording it so you can hear how it sounds. We'll take a pause here for you to spend some time with that worksheet. And again, you can find links to all of the worksheets below in the description. Okay, moving on, now that you've gotten warmed up talking about yourself, we want to practice effective communication skills to tell your story. So effective communication will vary based on who you're talking to. Different people, different situations, and different cultures all have various factors that will determine how you can communicate most effectively. We'll talk through some communication basics and think about the different scenarios you may be in during a transfer process. Then we'll work to think about how you may refine your story based on who you're talking to. For example, different scenarios may include a conversation with a lender or an investor, maybe a conversation with a farmer or a rancher who's tended land that they inherited, or a non-operating landowner who has no tie to the land. Or you may also be having a conversation with a land seeker who you're not familiar with, or a family member. At its basis, communication is a process of giving and receiving to share information and meaning. Why are we talking about this again in land transfer? Because a lot of communication is going to happen during the land transfer. Communication involves the person who is expressing themselves, the message or information they want to share, and the people who are listening and receiving their message, and back and forth and back and forth. The act of sharing information is expressing, the act of receiving information is listening. The message and the information and the meaning of what is said in a healthy conversation, each person plays both roles. This may sound simple, and in truth, it's quite complex because communication is affected by so many things: feelings, culture, power, generational preferences, as well as the channels through which the message is shared. In the spoken word, as gestures, over an email, or a message, or around a kitchen table. Effective communication skills take time to develop. And honing these skills you're thinking about today may take practice and is something that you can practice for the rest of your life. So while some conversations may be hard, everyone can improve how they communicate to improve understanding and achieve a positive outcome. So we're going to break down communication just a little bit more. We express ourselves in two main ways, through verbal and nonverbal communication. So the first, verbal communication, is the use of words to express messages and meanings. Verbal communication includes spoken and written word. And in the context of this module, verbal communication would be sharing your story with an audience. We've practiced a few of these, writing and speaking, today. And in a farmer ranch transfer, you'll likely practice all of these forms of verbal communication. From the informal conversations to formal conversations, formal writing, and casual writing. So we adapt communication to both formal and informal situations. For example, we use verbal communication formally maybe in meetings, as in talking to a lender, elected official, or reporter, and more informally with personal conversations with family and friends. We use it formally when we write letters, plans, business agreements, and then again, informally, even casually, in texts, social media posts. Knowing when to use different types of communication will depend on who you're speaking with, which we'll talk more about later. So, a few ideas around verbal communication skills when you're sharing your story. First, you want to obviously consider your audience and choose the ideal channel. It's important to think about your audience. What is their preferred way to communicate? Is it appropriate for the message you want to give them? How you write a text or talk casually is very different from a letter, and even more different from a press release, a formal presentation, or a farm or ranch business plan. Is the message simple or is it a difficult conversation? Which channel is going to be the best way for you to get the message across? So let's talk a little bit more about channels. What are channels? They are different ways we communicate. Text, email, letters, social media, phone calls, kitchen table conversations. It's especially important to choose the ideal channel for who you are talking to and what you're talking about. The channel you choose should reflect who you are writing to or speaking to, why and what you are communicating about. And some conversations may just need to be started with written, but really are a request for something in person. So going in, know what you want to say. Map out what you have to say before you start writing or verbalizing your values, visions, and goals. For more formal writing, it's a good idea to start with an outline that includes topics for the main points you want to make. And if you're sitting down one-on-one or presenting more formally, start with a bullet point list of the key information you need to convey. This will help you organize your thoughts and come across clearly. Use simple and clear language. So use simple, specific language and avoid jargon. Whenever possible, use short and familiar words. Simplifying your language and being clear will support you in telling a compelling story. When you can, try to use active language. Active language puts you, the subject, in front of the action, the verb. For example, passive language would say, the corn was harvested by me. Active language would say, I harvested the corn, or I'm harvesting the corn. And finally, proofread or practice and edit. Good writing comes from good editing and revisions. No matter how skillful you are, edit and revise your work for simple language, active language, legibility and mistakes. Check for spelling or grammatical errors and don't rely on spell check. Reread it to make sure before you send it or share what you've written that is clearly and effectively communicates what you intend to say. With writing, you have the great opportunity to make sure what you write is easy to read. Again, this depends on the channel. How you format writing for a web page is different from an email, report, or plan. But in general, allow for white space, choose fonts that are simple and large enough to be easy to read. If you're sharing something verbally, practice. Follow your talking points and pay attention to how you tell your story. Are certain words or phrases tripping you up? Maybe think about adjusting them. If you need to have a more formal conversation, be sure to time yourself and revise your talking points if you're filling up too much or too little time. And remember, you can always choose to share or delete. Timing is important for sharing written thoughts. You may also just want to write to process a difficult experience. And you can always use writing to get something off your chest and then not send it. You can use this to remind yourself of your feelings or delete it later. And remember, written words can be damaging if they're sent while someone is upset. So expressing frustrations in writing can be a starting point for editing once emotions have settled down. Writing can be an effective stress reliever and allow you to say that things that may need to be said and give you more time to process. If you do decide to send it, take a pause, think, choose the right channel and the right timing, use simple language and edit. This process may be helpful ahead of a difficult conversation as well. So moving on to nonverbal communication. Another way we communicate is through nonverbal communication. It is what is not being said in a situation and can sometimes be more informative of how a conversation is going. It's both important in what you are expressing and what you are receiving from others. Bringing awareness to your own body language will help you be a more effective communicator, and learning to read other people's body language will help you respond more effectively. It's important to remember that nonverbal communication is very different based on your cultural background and gender. None are right or wrong, but it can be easily misinterpreted when people are coming from very different places. Farmers and ranchers are probably all experts in nonverbal communication, whether it's intentional or not. If you think about the rhythm and activities of farming, they're often silent. People work alongside each other or with animals without a lot of talking. A lot of learning on farms and ranches happens by watching and observing without the use of words. So a few examples of nonverbal communication to be aware of that may be happening in farm and ranch transfer conversations: leaning into a conversation, showing interest, or leaning away, maybe with arms folded, showing frustration or disinterest, facial expressions, fidgeting. Eye contact and facial expressions are one indicator. Greetings and how we enter a space or exit a space are also commonly used body language. So a few nonverbal communication tips for sharing a compelling story. The role of body language or nonverbal communication is pretty large in telling a story. So here's a few thoughts to keep in mind as you prepare to share. Again, as in verbal communication, knowing your audience. The nuances of body language affect different people, different cultures, different generations in different ways. How other people read your body language and how you read theirs is influenced by what you know about them and what they know about you. In a farm or ranch transfer, you may need to talk to an accountant. You may need to talk to a family or a land trust. Pay attention to who they are and how they respond to you from the first greeting. If you don't know what puts them at ease, try mirroring them. And pay attention to body language. To observe your own, think about what you're saying through your movement. This may be unconscious, so bring some attention to it. Do you tend to nod or shake your head to indicate you're listening? Do you gesture with your hands when you talk, when you're excited? How do you enter a room? Do you walk with your shoulders down or with them up? Where are your eyes when you come in? Do you lean forward in a conversation or do you tend to lean back? What's your face doing? You can watch others to get a sense for how they're feeling in the situation as well. What is the other person's body movement telling you? Do they lean toward or away from you when they speak? Do they sit up straight? Do they slouch? You can think of a lot of examples when you start to bring attention to it. So eye contact is tricky. So choosing when to make it. It's tricky because it means different things in different culture, and it can be affected by age and gender. It also means different things in different conversations. Generally, it's a sign of confidence, honesty, and respect. For example, someone keeping eye contact in a conversation with a banker will be seen positively. But if a conversation has more conflict or charged emotions, too much eye contact can be seen as threatening or make people uncomfortable. So research has shown that eye contact builds bonds and empathy between people by activating the limbic mirror system in our brains. It's good to know when to use it and when to look away. Making eye contact isn't always easy. It can feel awkward, especially if you don't know the other person well. So if it makes you uncomfortable, practice with someone you know and try working on getting more comfortable with it. And finally, bringing more awareness to facial expressions. Facial expressions are thought to be universally understood. While that may not be entirely true, most cultures share some basic facial expression like surprise and happiness, anger and fear. Infants learn to read faces before spoken language, so it is really ingrained in us to understand faces. Often our faces may say what our words are not saying. So watching for other people's facial expressions will help you understand how they might be feeling. At the same time, be aware of what your own face might be saying, whether you're aware of it or not. The other thing to think about with nonverbal communication is, how do we know that the person is taking away what we want them to take away? And we see that through their body language and through their questions and responses. I'm going to switch to another piece, an important piece of communication, which is obviously listening. Listening is really the most powerful part of communication. A wise person said to me once, "We have two ears and one mouth." Listening is the act of receiving information, and one of the most important skills you can have in communication. It gives you information and helps you understand what is important to another person. It also helps you prepare for sharing your own story, entering negotiations, and it can help you avoid conflicts and misunderstanding. Again, listening can help you avoid conflicts and misunderstandings. At its core, it involves three things: being present, paying attention to meaning, and reflecting back what you hear. So let's look at each of these. Being present. Really pay attention to what the other person is trying to say. Take some focus and intention. To be present, you have to quiet your own thoughts. Don't start preparing a response until the other person has finished speaking. And while listening to their words, also listen to the rhythm and the tones they are using and their body language. You can show the speaker that you're listening by looking at them, nodding your head, keeping your body language open, but actually pausing to listen. Paying attention to meaning. It's also important to listen for the meaning behind the words, for what the person is really trying to say. Listen for what they value, what they need, and how they feel. In a farm or ranch transfer situation, listening for meaning may take many conversations and may be happening over many years. And finally, one of the best skills of listening is to reflect back what you hear. Reflect it back and clarify. You can summarize what you've heard by saying things like, "It sounds like what you're saying is that you need some time," or "What I hear you saying is that you're not ready for this," or "I like your idea to polish the fender." Ask them to clarify anything you don't understand. The trick is to not add your own experience or judgment about the situation, but listen to their experience. By reflecting back will help them clarify things for you and maybe for themselves. So, talking about effective communication, it's important to think about who defines the effective communication. We'll take some time to think on these questions about what effective communication is to you and what might be effective to your audiences. We'll think about some specific examples of verbal and nonverbal communication. But before I pause to let you think, this is important to note that we all communicate differently. People will approach communication differently, and I encourage you to find commonalities even when styles of communication may be different. I also want to acknowledge that this process may be frustrating for people of color, for women, people with disabilities, people who are coming in with little experience and who traditionally have been left out of land ownership and capital opportunities. It can also be frustrating for people who just may communicate differently. Effective communication can be a place where people get frustrated and give up on pursuing their vision or continuing a negotiation. So this is an area worth practicing and paying attention to. So a few questions for you to think about. How do you receive information best? And how does someone communicate things effectively to you? And how do you best communicate? And based on these, on your communication skills, how might someone else support you? You also want to think about these questions for your audience. How do they receive information? What might they consider effective? And how do they communicate best? If you'd like, you're welcome to take a pause here and think about those questions. And if not, we'll move on to identifying who you will tell your story to and why. This may be multiple people. We'll try to identify a few and practice adapting the letter that you wrote earlier to those people. So in modules 2 and 3 of this series of modules, we discuss people who have an interest or a stake in your farm or ranch transfer, as well as the supportive team you will build to help you bring your vision to life. Their point of view, current situation, and relationship to you are all different, and it's important to understand who you are telling your story to as you prepare. This is a bit of a repeat from module 2, but if you've not seen this, your key relationships are people who have a major interest or a stake in your farm or ranch transfer. These could include landowners who hold the assets involved in the transfer. They could be incoming producers who will acquire them, and other people affected by the situation. You have family members, employees, vendors, maybe even neighbors or community members. Your team are members who can advise you and help you reach your goals, like an accountant or an attorney. You can refer to building your team worksheet in module 2 to spend some more time thinking about who might be on your team. So understanding who you are preparing to share your story with and why they are a key audience to communicate with is important. Who you are talking to will determine how and what you prepare. You may need to present your vision to a lender or an organization who owns land, or you may need to talk about your vision and goals with your family or a landholder in that community. If you're a landowner, you may need to share your vision to an organization or a lender or an incoming producer who may or may not be related to you. What do you need to know about your audience to effectively communicate? And how do you adapt your visions, values, and goals is dependent on your audience. What do you need to know about your audience? What do they want? What do they need? And what is their generational and cultural point of view? Once you've narrowed in on your audience and what you understand of their knowledge and interests, you'll need to identify where, when, and how you plan to communicate with them. As you better refine effectively reaching your audience, keep in mind any specific deadlines you need to hit. For instance, if you hope to have completed a transition by the start of next growing season, you may have a different need in August than you do in February. And based on audience preferences, and to make sure you advance your goals within the time frame you need, you may have to prepare to use different types of communication channels. For example, websites, business plans, formal letters, phone calls, in-person meetings. So to help you think about your specific situation, we have a Prepare to Tell Your Story worksheet linked below in the description. Take some time to complete this, or at least think through the questions, and we'll pick up with adapting next. Okay, adapting your story to different audiences. Now that you've clarified who needs to understand your values and visions and goals, along with considerations on how to prepare, it's time to consider and practice how to adapt and refine your story based on that specific audience or audiences you're trying to reach. In the Prepare to Tell Your Story worksheet, you thought about who are your audiences, who needs to hear your story, and what do you know about them? Whether it's to a bank, a community member, or a family member, it's important to be able to share your values, visions, goals, and your story in a way that resonates with your audience while staying true to who you are. Depending on your audience and the type of presentation you're making, you may have a minute or less, or you may have plenty of time to present the full picture. The elements of your story that focus on how you deliver your story might change with different audiences because of who they are, but also because of what actions you want them to take. Adapting how you tell your story does not change your values, visions, and goals for an audience, but rather focuses their attention on the elements most important to the role that they will play in your farm or ranch transfer process. Depending on who you're talking to, you may also want to bring a business plan or an image to focus their attention, especially if an action is time sensitive. This can help bring your vision to life and help your story in a compelling way. Remember the image activity we started off with? This may be something you want to build on if you're going in to talk to a bank. So as you think about adapting your story, think about what would inspire this particular person or people to give you the support you want from them. For example, how would you adapt and refine if you're talking to a lender versus talking to a family member, if you're talking to a neighbor versus someone you don't know? All right, a little bit more about inspiring. So to inspire your audience toward action, you will want to practice the effective communication skills we talked about earlier. Good verbal skills, choosing the ideal channel, using simple language, knowing what you want to say, and proofing or practicing. And good nonverbal skills of knowing your audience, being aware of body language, facial expressions, and eye contact. Those basic skills will help, but to inspire action, you also want to be compelling to your specific audience. To achieve your goals, you will adapt your story and present it in a way that not only informs, but inspires. In land transfer, you want to communicate to convince your audience to support your goals and take actions in alignment with your values and vision. So the three basic pieces we've broken down about inspiring: understand your audience. As we learned earlier, you must start with understanding. Who's your audience? Why are you presenting to them? What do you want from them? What do they want? How will your ideas satisfy their needs? Express. Being yourself is critical. Being yourself is critical. This can be one of the hardest parts, depending on your comfort and the dynamics of the situation. It helps to start with a personal story that illustrates what you want your audience to take away from your conversation. The more passion you can show, the more you're likely to hold their attention. It may also help to use visual images because they trigger empathy in a way that words or facts and figures can't. So when you're presenting your ideas, remember to keep it honest and positive. Enthusiasm and clarity will do you good. However you adapt your story, you must express your ideas clearly and simply. Simplicity will help your audience understand you and what you want them to do. So try to keep it simple and explain things clearly. And listen. So much of communication is about what is heard. Listen so that your communication is responsive. Listen to what they're saying, both in their words and their body language. And remember, it's not a one-way street, it's a dialogue. While it's important to prepare what you want to say, it's equally important to pay attention to your audience and be ready to receive feedback and questions and respond. So we're going to move into practicing refining your story to a specific audience. And as a reminder here, these are the key elements of your story. We practiced working through these in your letters. You can refer to what you already created here, but this time you should outline what you would like to say to a specific person or group of people. You've already identified various audiences, so now you can choose which one you'd like to present to. So we have another worksheet to help you think through adapting your story. So take a look at the Adapt Your Story worksheet linked below. And you've created your story. Now we've considered effective communication for different audiences and discussed compelling communication strategies. Now it's time to adapt to a specific audience. So you want to start with the worksheet, get your thoughts out. You might want to have your prepare to tell your story worksheet close by. And ideally for this, you can find a partner to listen to your story and share feedback with you. But if not, or if you're not ready yet, identifying your audience and practicing saying your story out loud with that audience in mind is helpful and can help you refine it. You can also consider recording yourself and playing it back for you to assess how you did. You can use the communication skills checklist that's linked with the Adapt Your Story worksheet to guide feedback for you or for your partner. So the steps are using the first page of the worksheet. You'll want to describe your audience. How do you imagine talking to them? What setting would you be in if you're presenting to them? If you're working with a partner, describe that for them so they know who you're working to present to. You'll use the outline that you create from this worksheet to take, 3-ish or so minutes to present your story, again, to yourself or to a partner. If there's a listener involved, they can use the communication skills checklist to help remind you of the skills that we've already talked about today and take any notes. And if it makes sense to, if they're also practicing, you can switch places and repeat once the first person is gone. But either way, at the end, reflect on the communication skills that you used well and which ones could use some improvement. This is something you may want to practice for different audiences, and you may want to come back to over time as your visions may change. We'll pause here for you to take some time with that. You may want to pause here. I'll keep going. To the wrap up. So this was a quick and dirty preparation for you to create and tell your story. These skills take time. Keep returning to these worksheets and activities to keep practicing telling and owning your story. You may want to practice telling your story to different audiences with different partners or recording yourself. For some homework ideas, you can practice telling your story with a friend. You can work on refining your vision statement and talking points. You can complete the timeline at the end of the Prepare to Tell Your Story worksheet, or keep it updated, or just continue to think about the different steps you need to take. And transfer can take a long time, sometimes years, sometimes decades. I hope you can be patient and continue to refine your story as you go. As a reminder, here's the series of steps in a farm or ranch transfer. We've broken it down into 10 steps, but you'd likely take all of them. And it's not linear, so there's a certain amount of order, but you'll likely find you're moving forward and back several times before you're done. And finally, your story is an important part of this process. It can be a good place to come back to if you're getting frustrated with the pace or unknowns of the process, and reconnecting to why you're doing what you can do can be good motivation to keep pursuing your vision. Good luck. Thanks for listening. This was Module 4, Prepare to Tell Your Story of the Land Transfer Training Curriculum. I hope you found this useful. Remember, we do have trained staff who can help you continue on in your process. Look at the description below to find out how to connect with us and to find more information.